Somewhere online right now, a video with a title almost exactly like the one on this script is racking up views, built entirely around a genuinely real, genuinely rare astronomical fact, and then stretching that fact into something it was never actually meant to be. The real fact is this: within a single stretch of August 2026, the sky delivered an almost unprecedented cluster of events, a rare 6-planet alignment visible in the pre-dawn sky, a total solar eclipse sweeping across the Arctic, Greenland, Iceland, and mainland Europe, the first time totality has touched continental Europe since 1999, the peak of the Perseid meteor shower, one of the most reliable and most watched meteor displays of the entire year, arriving on the very same night. And, as if the month had not already delivered enough, a partial lunar eclipse following just over 2 weeks later, visible across most of the Americas. 4 major, independently tracked celestial events compressed into roughly a 15-day window. It is genuinely rare. It is genuinely worth watching. And it is exactly the kind of rarity that inevitably gets wrapped in the phrase, not a coincidence, as though the universe were sending a coded message rather than simply running the same predictable orbital mechanics it has run for 4.5 billion years. Comment sections under the viral clips have filled up with exactly the kind of speculation you would expect. Some of it playful, some of it genuinely convinced that a hidden hand orchestrated the timing, tying it to everything from ancient prophecy to modern geopolitical anxiety. So let us actually unpack what happened, why it happened, and why the honest answer is both less mystical and more genuinely impressive than the conspiracy version ever gives it credit for. Start with the 6-planet alignment itself, because this is the piece most likely to get the breathless, mysterious treatment online, and it deserves a clear, patient explanation instead. A planetary alignment, in the sense astronomers actually use the term, simply means that several planets appear relatively close together in the same region of Earth's sky at the same time, visible in a single glance or a single wide-angle photograph before sunrise. It does not mean the planets form a perfectly straight line out in actual 3-dimensional space, an image popular culture loves to imagine. But that essentially never happens, given the different tilts and paces of each planet's orbit. What causes an alignment like this is nothing more exotic than orbital. Timing. Every planet in the solar system moves around the sun at its own speed, determined entirely by its distance from the sun and the physics of gravity first worked out by Newton over 3 centuries ago. Mercury laps the sun in about 88 days. Neptune takes roughly 165 years to complete a single orbit, meaning it has not even finished one full lap since its discovery in 1846. Because these orbital periods are all different and all fixed by nothing more mysterious than each planet's orbital distance, there are moments, entirely predictable decades or even centuries in advance, using nothing more than basic orbital mechanics, when several of these independently moving worlds happen to gather on the same general side of the sun as viewed from Earth. That is what astronomers had already calculated publicly years before August 2026 arrived. Nobody discovered this alignment as a surprise. It was sitting in Orbita L calculation tables the entire time, as certain and as unmysterious as a calendar predicting when Easter falls, or a tide table predicting exactly when the water will rise and fall on a specific beach 18 months from now. The same software astronomers use to plot these alignments can just as easily run the calculation backward, identifying similar 6 and 7 planet groupings stretching back centuries, and forward, predicting the next comparable cluster years or decades in advance, all without needing to invoke anything beyond well-understood, thoroughly tested orbital mechanics. The same predictability applies, even more precisely, to the total solar eclipse that swept across the Arctic and into Europe on the same August day. A solar eclipse happens only when the moon's orbit carries it directly between Earth and the sun, at precisely the moment the moon is also crossing the plane of Earth's own orbit around the sun, a specific geometric alignment that occurs on a schedule astronomers can calculate with almost absurd precision, down to the second, for eclipses happening decades or even centuries into the future. Astronomers had the exact path of this particular eclipse, the exact regions that would experience totality, and the exact duration of totality, roughly 2.5 minutes at best, mapped out years in advance. The same way NASA and other space agencies routinely publish eclipse maps stretching well into the 22nd century, listing the precise date, time, and geographic path of eclipses that will not occur for another 100 years or more. There is no coincidence buried in that timing. There is simply orbital mechanics, understood by humans since roughly the time of Isaac Newton, applied with modern computing power to produce a prediction accurate enough that tourists were already booking hotel rooms along the path of totality more than a year before the actual event, and astrophotographers were scouting exacting viewing coordinates in Iceland and northern Spain based on eclipse maps published long before anyone thought to connect the date to anything else happening in the sky that same week. The predictability itself is, in a sense, the most remarkable part of the story, a testament to how thoroughly humans have mapped the mechanical rhythm of our own solar system, rather than evidence of anything mysterious layered on top of it. Layer the Perseid meteor shower on top of that same date, and the picture becomes, if anything, even less mysterious rather than more. The Perseids are not some independent celestial surprise arriving to coincide with the eclipse. They are an entirely separate, entirely predictable phenomenon that occurs every single year around the same mid-August dates. Without exception. Because Earth's orbit carries our planet through a specific trail of dust and debris left behind by a comet called Swift-Tuttle, a trail Earth has been intersecting at the same point in its orbit on the same approximate calendar dates for as long as astronomers have been tracking it, records that stretch back well over 1,000 years. To observations noted by Chinese astronomers long before telescopes existed, the only reason the 2026 Perseids received unusually enthusiastic coverage is that the shower's peak happened to fall on the same night as the eclipse in alignment, and because the moon's phase that particular night was unusually dark and new, meaning far less moonlight would wash out the fainter meteors, giving observers an especially clear view of a display that arrives, with complete reliability, at roughly the same time every August, regardless of what else is happening in the sky. Strip away the coincidental timing with the eclipse entirely, the Perseids would still have peaked on almost exactly the same night this year as every other year, simply because Earth passes through that same patch of comet debris on the same leg of its orbit annually, whether or not anything else notable happens to be occurring in the sky at the same time. So why did three entirely separate, entirely predictable, astronomical phenomena end up landing within the same 24-hour window? The honest answer is the least exciting one available, and also the correct one. It is exactly the kind of overlap that basic probability guarantees will happen. Occasionally, purely because there are only so many days in a year and several genuinely recurring astronomical events, alignments that happen every few years, eclipses that happen roughly twice a year somewhere on Earth, and meteor showers that arrive on fixed annual dates are all constantly cycling through the calendar independently of one another. Given enough years, some of those independent cycles are mathematically guaranteed to occasionally overlap on the same date. In the same way that two people in a room of only 23 others have, purely by chance, better than even odds of sharing a birthday, a famous statistical result that surprises most people, specifically because human intuition is bad at estimating how often coincidences like this should actually occur. That same intuition failure, sometimes called the birthday paradox in classrooms and statistics textbooks, applies just as cleanly to calendars full of independently cycling astronomical events as it does to rooms full of people and their birthdays. With enough independent events cycling through a fixed number of calendar days over a long enough stretch of years, overlaps are not just possible, they become close to inevitable. Astronomers who study eclipse and alignment cycles are not remotely shocked when a rare combination like this eventually lines up, because they can run the calendar forward and backward and identify similar clusters occurring at various points across the centuries, entirely without any external cause linking them together beyond the ordinary patient churn of orbital mechanics. Historical astronomical records, going back centuries, in cultures from ancient China to the Islamic Golden Age to Mesoamerica, document previous instances of eclipses landing near meteor shower peaks or planetary groupings, evidence that this kind of overlap, while uncommon on any single given year, is a recurring, cataloged feature of a solar system that has been running the same orbital mechanics for billions of years, not a modern anomaly unique to 2026. This is the exact point where the phrase, "not a coincidence," usually gets deployed online. And D, it is worth being honest about what that phrase is actually doing rhetorically. It sounds like a claim about physics. It is almost always, in practice, a claim about meaning, an attempt to suggest that because an event feels rare or dramatic, it must be connected to some larger hidden pattern, whether that pattern gets framed as a sign, an omen, a secret message, or evidence of some coordinated event humans are not meant to fully understand. The trouble is that rare does not mean connected, and dramatic does not mean intentional. Rare astronomical clusters have happened many times throughout recorded history, entirely without any accompanying global catastrophe, hidden. Agenda or secret message attached to them because the underlying cause was never anything more than the ordinary, uncoordinated cycling of planets, moons, and comet debris trails that have been doing exactly this since long before humans existed to notice or name them. It is also worth directly addressing the specific claim that tends to attach itself to planetary alignments, in particular, the suggestion that when several planets gather in the same part of the sky, their combined gravity does something measurable to Earth, triggering earthquakes, tsunamis, extreme weather, or some other physical consequence here on the ground. This claim has been tested repeatedly by actual physicists doing actual arithmetic, and it fails every single time for a very simple reason. Gravitational force depends enormously on both mass and distance, following an inverse square. Relationship that means doubling the distance between two objects cuts the gravitational pull between them to a quarter of its previous strength. And every planet involved in one of these alignments sits so overwhelmingly far from Earth, tens of millions to billions of kilometers away, that even Jupiter, by far the most massive planet in the solar system, exerts a gravitational pull on Earth from that distance that is a tiny, thoroughly negligible fraction of the pull our own moon exerts on us every single day from a mere 380,000 kilometers away. Stack every planet in the solar system into a single alignment, add up every one of their gravitational contributions, and the combined total still falls far short of a single ordinary high tide caused by the moon alone, or, for that matter, the gravitational pull exerted on your own body by a large building or a passing truck at close range, a comparison physicists sometimes use specifically to illustrate just how vanishingly small planetary gravitational influence on Earth actually is at these distances. Seismologists and geophysicists have looked specifically for any correlation between planetary alignments and earthquake activity, going back through decades of seismic records and cross-referencing them against known historical alignment dates, and have consistently found none, because the physical mechanism being proposed simply does not carry enough force to do anything measurable to a planet as large as Earth, whose crust responds to tidal forces on the scale of the moon and sun, not to distant planets, whose gravitational signature at Earth's distance is smaller than background noise. None of this is meant to drain the wonder out of what actually happened in the sky, because the wonder was never really the problem, the false explanation was. There is something genuinely, legitimately awe-inspiring about standing outside before dawn and picking out 6 separate worlds scattered across the same patch of sky with nothing but your own eyes and a bit of patience watching. Visible remains of material that Swift Tuttle shed on some previous pass through the in-Earth solar system centuries or millennia ago. Tiny grains of rock and ice finally meeting their end in a fraction of a second of visible light after an unimaginably long, cold journey through space. None of that needs a hidden meaning attached to it to be worth your attention. The actual science, once you sit with it for a moment, is already stranger and more beautiful than the manufactured mystery layered on top of it. You are watching objects the size of mountains and moons and entire worlds, moving along paths calculated by nothing more than gravity and momentum. Planting and harvest, but it also misfires constantly when applied to genuinely random or independently caused events, especially rare ones that stand out precisely because they deviate from the ordinary pattern of daily life. The brain, having evolved to prioritize spotting potential threats and patterns over correctly calculating statistical probability, tends to weigh a single striking coincidence far more heavily than the underlying math actually justifies. A well-documented cognitive bias researchers have studied across everything from gambling behavior to conspiracy theory belief formation. A cluster of celestial events landing in the same 15-day window is exactly the kind of statistically unusual, visually striking occurrence that triggers that pattern-seeking instinct hard, and content built around phrases like "it's happening now and it's not a coincidence" is, whether deliberately or not, exploiting that same deeply human tendency for views and engagement rather than offering an actual explanation grounded in the physics anyone can look up and verify for themselves. Understanding that tendency in yourself is not a cynical exercise. It is simply useful self-awareness, the same kind of awareness that helps a person recognize why a coincidence feels so much more significant in the moment than a calm look at the actual numbers would justify. If there is a genuinely accurate, still slightly startling way to describe what actually Predictable schedules for longer than human civilization has existed to watch them. Every few years, purely as a matter of arithmetic rather than intention, some of those clocks happen to strike in close enough succession that a person standing on Earth's surface gets to witness several of them at once. That is not a message. It is not a warning. It is not evidence of anything being orchestrated behind the scenes. It is what happens when you have several reliable clocks running for billions of years, and every once in a while, purely by the numbers, more than one of them chimes on the same night. The actual coincidence explanation is not a letdown. It is, if you actually sit with the scally of time and distance involved, the single MO August 2026 will keep producing similar rare alignments and overlaps for as long as the solar system continues to exist, sometimes decades apart, sometimes centuries apart, each one just as calculable, just as explicable, and just as free of hidden intention as this one. What makes this particular stretch of sky watching worth remembering is not that it proves anything about forces working behind the scenes. It is that it offers a rare, visible reminder of just how precisely humans have learned to predict the mechanics of their own cosmic neighborhood, turning what once would have seemed like a terrifying, unexplainable omen into a scheduled, welcomed, calendared event that families set alarms for and travel across continents to witness. Aligned to send a signal, but that a species barely a few centuries removed from